In the freezing Umbrian winter of January 1457, a woman walked the mountain path from the town of Cascia to the village of Roccaporena. She was on a fool's errand, searching the snow for a blooming rose and ripe figs. The ground was frozen solid. Biologically, the request was entirely absurd. Yet the dying woman who sent her out into the cold already knew the impossible harvest would be waiting. That dying woman is known today as Saint Rita of Cascia, the Church's supreme advocate for impossible causes. The disruption of the natural order seen in that winter rose became the defining pattern of her life. We are looking at a woman whose daily reality was defined by crises with no visible exit, where the laws of nature and society were routinely suspended. Look at this photograph of the hillside town of Cascia. In the 15th century, these green mountains hid walled cities torn apart by bitter, bloody factions. At a young age, Rita was married into this chaos to a man named Paolo Mancini. For 18 years, her marriage was an endurance test. Paolo was violent, unfaithful, and deeply entrenched in a deadly blood feud with the rival Cheeky clan. She responded to his violence with a radical counter-strategy: absolute silence, unbroken fidelity, and constant prayer. Her patient offering eventually broke him. Paolo publicly renounced his family's vendetta and begged his wife for forgiveness. But escaping a vendetta in medieval Italy was rarely that simple. Shortly after his conversion, Paolo was ambushed on a road and stabbed to death by the rival Cheeky faction. Surviving 18 years of abuse only to stand at your husband's funeral and publicly forgive his murderers is a victory that defied every basic human instinct for self-preservation. The violence, however, did not stop at the grave. Rita's brother-in-law immediately began grooming her 2 young sons to fulfill the unwritten law of the vendetta. They were expected to hunt down and kill their father's murderers. Rita pleaded with her boys, but the cultural pressure was too strong. So she made a terrifying prayer. She asked God to take her sons by natural death, rather than allow them to commit murder and lose their souls. Within a year, an outbreak of dysentery swept through the town. Both boys contracted the illness, but they died fully reconciled with God and their enemies before the end. Her actions reveal a rigorous theological calculus. Physical death is a tragedy, but mortal sin, the eternal separation from God, is an irreversible, infinite catastrophe. Now a childless widow, Rita sought entry into the local Augustinian convent. The nuns rejected her 3 separate times. They feared the still raging blood feud between her family and the Cheekies would breach the cloister walls. To gain entry, she had to achieve the impossible. Rita went to the rival factions and single-handedly brokered a written, signed peace treaty between the 2 warring families. What followed belongs to the mystical tradition. Historical records state she was transported at night over the locked convent walls by Saints John the Baptist, Augustine, and Nicholas of Tolentino. In the morning, the nuns found her praying inside the bolted courtyard. This establishes the governing rule of Rita's life. When human effort exhausts its absolute limits, like a widow forcing a peace treaty on warring clans, supernatural grace intervenes to bridge the final gap. Rita lived as an Augustinian nun for 40 years. On Good Friday in 1442, after hearing a sermon on the Passion, she knelt before a wooden crucifix and asked to share a portion of Christ's physical suffering. A single thorn detached from the carved crown and pierced her forehead. It left an open, festering wound that would never close. The wound suppurated and emitted a stench so foul that it forced her into near-total isolation from the other sisters for the last 15 years of her life. There was exactly one reprieve. During the Jubilee of 1450, she wanted to visit St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, seen here in this vintage photograph. To allow her to make the pilgrimage, the wound completely closed. It reopened the exact moment she returned to the convent in Cascia. This physical mark turned her submission to the cross into a literal, agonizing reality. Which brings us back to the freezing winter of 1457. When her relative found that red rose and 2 ripe figs in the snow, she understood the message. It was a divine signal that her family was safely in heaven. Rita died on May 22nd. The convent bells reportedly rang without human hands, and her foul wound suddenly emitted a sweet fragrance. The first post-mortem miracle occurred almost immediately. a crippled carpenter named Secco Barberi offered to build her coffin, and mid-sentence he was instantly healed of his paralysis. Rita's legacy rests on an investigative dossier constructed with strict legal and medical standards. Just 3 days after her death, public notary Domenico Angeli began documenting 11 inexplicable cures under sworn legal oath. This evidentiary chain remained unbroken. By 1610, 46 miracles were recorded, and archdiocesan inquiries from 1628 documented her deceased eyes opening in the presence of witnesses. Then came the rigorous Vatican medical scrutiny. Under Pope Leo XIII, seen in this historical portrait, the Church approved her 1900 canonization based on the instantaneous, scientifically inexplicable cures of Elisabetta Bergamini's blindness and Cosma Pellegrini's terminal disease. And finally, we have the physical evidence itself. This image shows Rita's unembalmed, incorrupt body. It has been subjected to repeated medical examinations from 1457 all the way to the modern era. Any honest naturalistic account must successfully explain away this entire combined dataset, spanning hundreds of witnesses and 6 centuries. Today, millions flock to the Basilica of St. Rita in Cascia, shown here, to honor her official papal title, Patroness of Impossible Causes. Her patronages map directly to her lived reality. She is the advocate for abused wives, wayward children, the chronically ill, and the profoundly lonely. You might be carrying an impossible cause right now, a ruined marriage, a lost child, a terminal diagnosis, or an unanswered prayer that seems entirely hopeless. Rita approaches these pleas with the weight of a 6th-century track record of defying the laws of nature. St. Rita of Cascia, advocate of the impossible, pray for us.